Okay, we are ready to begin and we are live. Thank you.
Can you hear us now?
We can.
So I think it's time to call the committee meeting of the Communications Committee to order. I thank the committee members, all of whom are present, and the chair and the executive. Thank you all for showing up. Emily DeSantis, our liaison and our communications director, is on. And when we get to part of the agenda, unless they're already on, I guess not. These are joining us later. Let me just say, I put this agenda together trying to keep in mind the priorities. We have a lot to cover. Not sure if we can cover everything today, then obviously we don't need a meeting next week, but let's just try. So the first order of business is the annual report. So Emily, do you want to make some comments?
Sure. We've been working on the annual report now for about a month and a half, and it's really been a team effort with my office and every division within the agency to pull it all together, make sure the data is in there and accurate.
So Claudia, I think you need to mute the computer.
Go ahead.
And we wanted to make sure that the report also reflects not only what happened in 2022, but also shows, how much the commission has been working and the progress they've made this year in the past 6 months to move forward on their objectives and their kind of their mission moving forward. So that's what we did to put to the report together. It is really a result of teamwork throughout the agency, and we welcome your feedback.
Well, let me just ask the first question. And Seymour raised this in his comments last night. This is covering the first 6 months of 2023, intended to?
So the data in it is through 2022. It's all of the year of 2022. But given that we are now in July and we've had 6 months of progress from the commission, when we put together the report, we thought it was important to show that progress. As you know, we have to report out on the annual meeting by statute. So we didn't want to wait another full year to report out on a meeting that happened in March. So the strategy going ahead was, yes, to report out on what the commission has been doing as well in the past 6 months, given that we are, 6 months after the closing of 2022. Next year, we do aim to have the report out a little bit earlier, and we will encompass, all of our actions in 2023, but we didn't want there to be such a gap between when the report ended and when it was published.
Let's just stick on that point for a minute. Seymour, do you want to? No. When you say the statistics, at some point I made in my memo, the statistics, I think we should make clear that the statistics therefore cover, as I understand it, 2023 as well through June. Is that right?
No, the statistics are through December 2022, which is reflected, and it says right in the report that if it's another time frame that we note that. But for instance, in the lobbying section, when we pulled the data, that was in May, but it was for 2022 data. So if people were late in their submissions for 2022, we were able to capture some of that because we pulled the data in May. So the data pull for the lobbying section, for instance, is as of May 15th. So everywhere that there is data, we put in that what time frame the data reflects. We are very intentional about that, and when we pulled the data if needed.
But you say on page 5 that the information contained includes data for calendar year 2022, unless otherwise noted. Is that consistent with?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. All right. I don't know if you want to go through the individual comments. I mean, I have had a number, but Dolly, you had your hand up. Did you want to?
Oh, no, let me see my comments.
saw your comments. Did you send it to her? Well, let me just-
Did you receive my comments, Emily?
I did not.
Okay.
I'll
You-
send it to you again.
Well, the goal here is to make the revisions and these report companies will approved at the July meeting. That's the goal.
Yeah, I think that's what we said.
Do July possible or well, would you?
That's with the caveat of how extensive the revisions are, right? Given that that meeting is next week, we could not do like a full remake of the annual report in time for that meeting. If it's, tweaks here and there, we could certainly get that done, but just the caveat of that.
You did see my comments, right?
I do have your comments, I do.
Yes, okay, so you,
And I have a few that I'll send, but nothing substantial. Just more questions.
and Seymour sent you some comments last night. But then just let me ask conceptually, do we want to deal more directly with the fact that we have substantial increased responsibilities, particularly in the training area? We want to lay the groundwork for the arguments that we're undoubtedly going to make about needing more trainers. You make some allusion to it, but should it be more specific?
In the annual report itself.
Yeah.
The annual.
We do
report,
mention,
Let's cover that.
It does cover. Okay.
I just sent it to you.
we do mention the increase in the number of staff that we have to train and the amount that is and how that's a 30-fold increase. But if you want us to put it like more up front in the executive summary, we could certainly do that. We've put it in the training section and as well as like in some of the background in the introduction. But if you want us to put it like right up front in the executive summary or do a specific call out box to that effect to emphasize it, we could certainly do that.
Just, I mean, Sandy would know better than I, but I just wonder whether next year we're going to have a fight over our budget because we're going to want more money because of the training. Therefore, we're trying to say where we stand. While we've said it, get lost in the shuffle because of the details.
But in fact, and we'll talk about this at the commission meeting, we want to begin preparations for the run-up to next year's budget proposal. We'll be likely seeking additional funding across the board by the agency.
But to Michael's question, and I put this to everybody, is there a need to emphasize it more strongly, or do you think it's sufficiently emphasized in the report as it stands, the fact that we are going to require more resources?
We can have a more robust discussion of that, but we're not prepared at this point. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. The committees haven't addressed the question of prospective funding yet.
So does that mean the language that we have in the report you think right now is sufficient?
I do think it's sufficient. I'll take another look at it. I do think it's sufficient.
I do think that we should add where you describe ECRA around page 10, that we should add that the commission now elects its own chair, and of course the confirmation process to deal with that, but without singling that out more than taking a kick at the former governor, I think adding that sentence would be a useful addition.
Well, they do say,
We can certainly,
I think what's in this,
Adding a sentence to the fact that in addition to the other changes that are made on page 10, that the commission now elects its own chair.
and they say, go ahead.
Well, it says it in a more, less direct
Commissions
way.
elect the chair of the commission for a 2-year term.
Yeah, yeah. The one thing that gives me concern, I don't have any constructive comment, but keeping in mind that we're going to seek an amendment to the open meetings law to eliminate the physical access requirement. The attention in the draft to the fact that we're now subject to the open meetings law, which is consistent with the law, is fine. But we've got to be very careful that we're then not, when we seek an amendment that will slightly limit access, we don't want to regret that we wrote that sentence.
I was very intentional in how I structured that sentence, because we're talking about is committee meetings, correct? And so we just said we have granted access to committee meetings via live stream in the report. That's the only mention, and post the video online. So that's the only mention right there. The mention to physical access, it refers to the full commission meetings.
Okay, I just worry, thinking of the lack of principle perhaps to people who are going to oppose our amendment. We just got to be very careful that we haven't written anything that we're going to regret in that connection. So, that's it. I guess my other point is the various statistics that you have for some of the units, which are very interesting, but they go on and on for pages and pages, which may mean that the reader may just close the report. And I just question whether, instead of those statistics, which go on for about 20 pages, I think, whether they should be referred to as Exhibit A or something like that.
Like moving the lobbying statistics as an appendix at the end.
Yeah, yeah. The
Probably do that.
The investigation statistics are also very long, but the investigation whole section is at the end of all the units, so it doesn't quite tell you as much, but I would just suggest taking another look at that. And then in terms of the investigation, I don't know, you have to think about it, but the fact that we don't mention the Cuomo issue at all, and the investigations are at the end of the various units, and the general public, when they think of the Ethics Commission, I assume thinks more of investigation than other things.
Investigations, ongoing investigations are confidential, so we don't discuss the substance.
Right.
And typically don't even refer, except by number, to particular investigations. In this report, after an investigation is concluded,
Right.
depending upon the outcome, there'll be more specific disclosure. But during the pendency of the investigation, we don't talk about the substance of it.
Yeah, I just question that as you read the whole document, it's not till page 84 that you get to the subject matter of investigations. And would it be better to move that section before you get to some of the other sections?
Well, that kind of response to one of the questions I had, is that the summary was 42 pages long. That's a long summary. You know,
I wonder if the pages 47 to 22, 47 to 72, as Chair Cardozo has suggested, if you do make that an Exhibit A or put into the appendix, you have to move the investigation section up a whole 40 pages, so that can make a difference.
Yep. And the executive summary, just so you know, is only 4 pages. We did have an introduction, which was like front matter to give more background on the commission as it stands, and that's where all the bios are. So that's like the introductions. That's not the summary.
but even the introduction is, if that's the case, you're right, correct me. You had 3 sections, and the second section was the introduction, and it was significant. You know, introductions to me is 4 to 5 pages tops. It gives me an overview of what I'm about to read. And it's 42 pages, it's not 35 pages long.
Well, but that's because the introduction includes, for example, the biographies.
Should the bios be someplace else? Should it be at the end? Should it be short? I mean, 3 and 4 page bios, it's also a bio. That's not about, you don't need to have.
My grandson enjoyed it.
Well, yours, a snapshot of that. I just think the bios were long and excessive and got in the way of the report. You're not gonna read 42 pages before they get to the meat of it.
That's the issue.
Right.
We could also move those to the back if you like, or I could try to just shorten everybody's bio to about a paragraph, depending.
Short.
I think if you maybe just listed up front who the commissioners are and their affiliations, and then you can put the bios in the back. As another.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, those are.
May I just make one comment? This is an introductory annual report for this commission. And it'll work either way. But the logic of putting the bios in front for this particular one was to feature the composition.
I think it's too much. I think you could put that on the website. You could put a full detailed bio on the website and just a summary of who we are. Right. Yeah. In the annual report. I don't think that's all pushing it about us.
So we would highlight the commissioners up front, maybe name and affiliation. We could do either what we have or some abbreviated version of that for the appendix, and then have a live link as well to the full line. Does that sound okay?
So you're saying just a line about who we are, what we're affiliated, nothing more, and the photo will be there or not?
Yeah, the photo would stay, yeah.
Okay, so, all right, I think that's fine.
Does that sound okay, Emily?
So let me just make sure I'm understanding. So with, where the commission will be listed, it'll just be like 1 or 2 sentences about each commissioner with their photo. And then do you want the full bios added to the back or no?
Yes, to the back, yes.
Okay, yep.
Or a link, you can do a summary or a link, either one.
Got it.
The only other comment I want to raise is there's no direct reference to the various informal guidance that takes up obviously a lot of staff time. I mean, it's implicit, but it's not quite there. I just wonder whether we should mention it a little bit more.
Oh, more than we do. We
Yeah.
do physically mention the number that.
But, yeah, but I don't know that the average reader would understand the fact that, staff spends a great deal of time giving informal guidance. And maybe I'm just influenced because that's what we see all the time. But I wonder if we're doing justice to that part of what we do.
We can expand that. The explanation, guidance itself is confidential. We do have a staff proposal separate from the annual report with respect to the annual. On the website, in redacted form. Because they do represent, as you say, a good deal of staff forms.
Good. I also took issue with the fact that there's a statement that we're just about finished the drafting of the new regulations. And I thought that was not correct.
What we meant to say, if we didn't communicate it properly, I'll take credit for that. We can revise it. We're simply pointing out that regulations have now been across the board conformed text to the requirements of the statute. And it's not intended to in any way foreclose the review process and any further changes that this commission may be making. But operationally, the bare minimum necessary has been taken care of. That was the point.
That was the point, right. But I think actually related to that, Seymour raised this point, is to say that we can follow up and meet with people on the communication who raised issues at the public meeting in the fall, I think it says. I don't think that's necessarily correct, that we're going to, everyone who stood up, we're not going to meet some of the people, for example. And should it be a more ambiguous sentence along those lines?
That was intended to refer to the roundtable that we had discussed, where we were going to invite certain individuals to come in and further, where you would have the opportunity to ask them questions. I can refine it a little bit and just say we'll hold roundtables and not specifically say, with who.
Yeah, I just think, and we said the fall, query whether in fact we're going to be in a position, I wish we were, to have another roundtable with some of these people. We're not going to even start talking about it until the September meeting. And so I just think, take a look at the sentence and maybe make it a little bit more.
We'll adjust. I mean, it's clearly the intention is to communicate that on an as-needed basis, we'll be making those selections.
Right, and the intent there was before we finalized our legislative agenda by the end of the year, that we would talk with folks, but if the thinking is now you'd want to do that later, that's fine. But that
It
was the
sounded to
intent,
me
so,
like-
we develop our proposals.
I'm sorry, Emily. It just sounded to me like the intent is to not communicate that we will meet with everyone who was at our annual hearing. Is that correct, Mike?
Yeah. And look, it took us, 6 weeks to organize the last one that we had probably 9 months ago. So I just worry if we're not going to start talking about that till September, I think we have to be very careful. We don't want to say, hey, you said you were going to have a meeting and you didn't have it. That was your point.
I have a question. I'm just, and I don't, should we get people's permission to put their photos on our report? Like we have people speaking at the commission open meeting, is that correct? Right? I saw a photo of someone at the open meeting.
Yeah, it's on page 35.
We'll take a look at that.
I'm just curious.
They're snaps, I think, from the video.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't, but I think.
I don't know that it's,
There
well,
were
look at the
pictures
question.
that I took at the meeting.
I didn't mean to monopolize the conversation, but
Thank you. To say, Emily, I thought it was a really nice report. You did a great job. And thank you for jumping in, coming on staff so soon and doing such a wonderful job with the annual report. So thank you for that. I also want to point out that I do have a few comments. I resent those changes to you, but they're just a few big ones I thought I'd mention now. But I want to say that my comments really comes around organization and some of the wording that was used. But I take into consideration that you've got a timetable to get this done. So don't feel that you need to, deal with the questions and the comments that I've made. I'll be thinking about that next year. But I just wanted to mention that a couple of things. First, it opens for me with a chart. And it gave me no context as a person not familiar with. I guess the question is, who's the audience? Because when I put with the chart, and my understanding when you do charts, it supports narrative. So to provide context in terms of chart means, I think about putting that someplace further down in your opening statements. Some of the terminology for me was confusing. I'm just wondering whether, again, who's the audience? So, for example, you use the term, the top 10 client spenders, 11 to 8 years. I mean, it took me a while to figure out what you were talking about when you say top 10 spenders. That might be common to us in the inside, but I had no idea what that meant. I didn't understand what you were asking for. It looks like you were coming up with expense reports from the lobbying organization, your clients, and you were showing the shifts. But I walked away figuring, so what am I supposed to, how am I supposed to feel about this? So I'm just hoping that you think about providing some context before you go into the technical aspect of our report.
So we could put in, what the purpose of sharing the data is, which really is to know, who's influencing, and Carol, correct me if I'm wrong, who's influencing our government officials and for what, and what purposes are they spending it? But we could certainly add context that explains that to the start of that section, as to why we're sharing this data. And then we can certainly put in, a definition that describes what a client spender is.
Thank you. On page 9, paragraph 5, your last sentence, would you say the commission has established audit work building an ethics commission consistent with the ideals of ECRA? This includes speaking on the notion of creating transparency, fairness, and warrants public trust. Creating an infrastructure to sustain.
What page are you on? I'm sorry, Commissioner. I wasn't following.
If you look at, well, I'll just say this. When you see my comments, take a look at page 9, 5.
Okay.
In terms of what you might want to include. And again, don't feel like you have to change this for me because it's fine the way it is. I just want to talk for clarification. You might want to think about that next year.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. Transition. I just hate using the word Jacob in our
The link, not the rear Jacob.
it's like, well, I guess I say here, transition. This section does not reflect the issues with which to grapple with. The IRC did not work for me. I mean, but why, I don't know whether or not the selection process of IRC needs to be in our annual report.
I think that's a significant change though. And I think we should,
Our existence as a body may hinge on that in certain settings.
And would you want to include it?
I think so. Yeah.
I couldn't hear you, Fred.
I shouldn't be saying what I'm saying, so I'm actually.
This suggests we,
Just
our language was carefully chosen.
So we had to do a couple of things. We had to
Put a sentence.
transfer, staff had to be transferred from one agency to another. We had to bring the new commissioners online. We had to develop an organization plan for short-term staffing. You had to develop a 3-year plan for achieving your goals, to achieve your goals for the year. And you had to develop an organization plan for the commission to ensure that better oversight and transparency take place. So I just think that my notes will talk about things I think that we've done that may not have been mentioned in your report.
so I think just to paraphrase what you're saying, Claudia, is that without the past is the past, and maybe we should talk about it. But to say something like, as a result of the formation of a new commission, we had to do a number of things that included A, B, C, D.
Right.
So I don't see any downside to saying that.
No, we can do, those are good suggestions, they're all good suggestions, and what goes into the language.
Okay.
Those are all my
I can add that,
comments.
and I see I've got it nicely bulleted in your email, so I can work from that.
I apologize, I didn't realize I was supposed to, I thought you had sent that directly. Okay, any other suggestions or comments that we want to give to families?
Well, I submitted a number of comments late yesterday. Most of them pertain to the materials that hoping that we have done in 2023, and I understand the rationale. So I agree with that. That we ought to point out the steps that we're taking in compliance with the statute. But I have a couple other comments. I think it's on page 36. I think maybe it's this too. A couple of the suggestions made, I think, actually require legislative action. I think do mention that that the committee will be making recommendations with respect to legislative action. But it doesn't necessarily say that some of those items require legislative action. And I also was a little concerned that I don't think we've really worked on implementing those recommendations because the committees are still looking at them, make recommendations to the full commission as to whether we should adopt any of those recommendations. So I think we would need to modify that to that degree. Page 30, it's on page 36.
Yeah. I think that's
Yep,
good.
and we can, so that was like things that we received that we had already heard previously that we knew were issues, like getting the button, Carol, to terminate, right? So that was like a recommendation in the lobbying application. People have wanted a button to terminate, and we are already working on that. I know Carol's hard at work at getting that termination button, something that did not require. So that's why, that's one example of something we already are working to implement. But if you want me to strike that, I'm fine to do that as well.
I think the distinction, and we'll get to it when we talk about the committee reports, is some of the things we want to change, and we're already, someone says, make it easy to read forms on the website, or you should put X, Y, and Z on the website. We don't need any legislation. We need a consensus. But if we want to make nominees to lobbying nominees to the court, that requires legislation. We may have views about it, and we're going to discuss later on whether we should express those views, and if so, how. But there is a distinction of a lot of the regulations between we need legislation, and that means it needs a policy decision by the legislature, as distinct we need to change our practice to make us more efficient. And I just wonder whether we should be a little bit clearer in how we make those statements.
Well, and that's why we specifically limited changes already implemented to a number. We didn't suggest we've gone beyond that. Somewhere in, for example, in the education training, the idea of having some flexibility, having file or non-file. That's you can see discretion within examples. So those are things.
But some are much more discretionary. For example, making candidates, new candidates file. That needs, we need, and reasonable people, I have my own views of it. Reasonable people can differ, and I think we're going to have to decide as a commission, are we going to take a public position?
Yeah, so specific commission members, for example, whoever changes the law needed to implement some of the recommendations offered by those.
And whether they should be.
And whether they should be.
I think is, I guess what I'm thinking is we don't want to say in this report that the commissioner has decided to endorse a particular legislative change. That's.
And is there a place where
I can clarify that.
and where
I can
would
clarify
that?
that, I know exactly.
That's on page 36 ahead of just ahead of the paragraph, public hearing comment. Last couple of sentences.
Okay. Yes,
I didn't include this in my. It's on page 38, then again later on page 78. refer to marketing and communications plan. It just, people reading it may think, well, what are you marketing? I think we ought to make it clear that we're trying to market the effectiveness of what we do so that people who want to make complaints or report things will do it. If it just says marketing communications plan, it's almost like we're trying to sell ourselves as opposed to trying to solicit information.
And we could just call it a communications plan as well. We don't have to call it a marketing and communications plan.
Public education also works. But yeah, communications.
But I think we can talk about some of the exception requests. It might be helpful to point out how many were granted.
We can do that.
Emily, I want to reiterate what Claudia had said. I think it's a very, very good report. Dazzled by the fact that you've only been here, it seems like from what you wrote, about 10 years, and consisting of 2 months. So we really appreciate. But now let me
Can I do a couple of picky things
Sure.
before we move on? Just.
Can I just clarify something before we move on? To be clear, thank you. I did not write the whole report. The divisions wrote their individual sections. I did a lot of the front matter and stuff and reviewed it, but as did Sandy and others. But this was really a team effort, so I want to put that in there. But I heard somebody say something about saying how many of the exemptions we gave. And so was that the reference on page 81, Commissioner James, about the FDS exemptions?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I got that before I go.
And can I just say, just to kind of answer Commissioner Edwards' question, I just figure I can easily jump in. So for the lobbying section, generally speaking, the media really focuses on the lobbying data, which is why you see so many charts. It's just been, accumulation of learning, living and learning about what becomes people are interested in, and expenses and how expenses, what expenses are, what money is being spent on what expense for lobbying. The charts about like who is a top 10 client spender, we could call them just clients. And underneath the chart, it does say clients ranked by, and the difference why we call them spenders is because you have the professional lobbyists, and that chart says it's based on compensation. So that's how much money is being paid to lobbyists, right? Versus top 10 client spenders. And the reason why we call them that, we could just say clients, but underneath we say clients ranked by compensation and expenses, because the client not only will pay a lobbyist compensation, a retained lobbyist, they also will sometimes be their own lobbyists, so they're paying in-house people compensation, they're paying retained lobbyist compensation. And then it also takes into account expenses, because clients spend a lot of money, on media activities and media campaigns. So it includes both, whereas the top 10 professional lobbyists is just based on how much money they're being paid. And again, and this one is more of the client, which is the bigger picture. So they're hiring the retained lobbyist and compensating them. They're also lobbying on their own behalf and retaining, and compensating their own people. Plus, a big component of what makes someone a top 10 client is basically how much money they spend on the lobbying. So that's and if you see underneath each title, it does explain what it is. We certainly could call them top 10 clients instead of top 10 client spenders, but I just wanted to address why we say it that way.
Thank you for that explanation. I guess I still walk away with what, as a reader, what is it am I supposed to take away from this? What is the value? What are the, not the value, what is the implications of a top spender? They have more influence? I mean, why is it that we're monitoring it?
And you want
because we're trying to
I'm
share.
just saying, give the reader context
Right.
to understand why it is I care about the top spender and how they're looking at, and how they're using their dollars. Truthfully, I can think, well, they may have more influence, or how much are they vested into to influencing someone, but I don't understand that. I did not get that, walk away from that understanding when I was reading. I'm just saying, again, who is your customer? And if it's the public, you want to give them some context, but you want them to see the data.
But it's the public, but it's also the specialized groups that we're also writing to, so that the lobbying groups, for example, will understand what those statistics mean. And hopefully the
Constituents.
everyone. We're talking to the general public on the one hand, but we're also talking to the lobbying groups and their clients, and every state employee who's subject to our investigation.
So I suggest we come up with language that meets that dual audience.
Yes, but you're inevitably going to get to narrow language for those smaller audiences that the other people are going to skip because they don't care.
Part of it, to me, is how much, I'll just say, I'm not suggesting this, I'm just going to say it for the sake of discussion, how much commentary we have in a sense. So that, you have the stat that you have these are the 10 highest spenders in the lobbying sphere. So what? I think is your question. What am I supposed to take away from that? Does that take us into the realm of commentary if we say another sentence? Maybe we compare it to what it was like 10 years ago or in 2007 as one of the charts does. But so that's the question. I think, right? What are the implications of this information for the general public? I feel the same thing about the fact there's $300 million plus spent on lobbying in the state. That's almost $500 million. Yeah, I don't know that level of, but what's the level of what's the sentence after that? And maybe there is no sentence, but I think that's the question am I right?
Yes, it is.
Question you're asking, what's the sentence after those stats?
And it might require a footnote if we need to be that specific, and provide a small footnote to give me a sense of what it is you're trying to say.
Typically, this document, it's responding to the requirement of the statute that we report on the performance of the agency, and not so much on the policy underlying both our statutory imperatives and the way our regulations implement and carry out those imperatives, and how staff perform. So it's a more objective kind of presentation.
Would it be fair to say that this really is about data and statistics as much as it's about anything else?
Yes.
Okay, then that helps. And then we can figure out we can comment freely at our meetings on what we think the implications of this data and these statistics are.
All right. Any other comments?
I just have picky
No, I'm
stuff.
sorry.
So
Go ahead.
just two, I think. One on page 34. Maybe just help me understand. Just on the in records request received for polling 77, but records provided 87. What's happening there?
It means 10 requests were still pending, so we might have gotten them, say, like on December 20th, and so they carried over into January of this year to fulfill them.
I see. Okay, that's very helpful.
And these are numbers of requests and numbers of responses. They don't reflect on the quantity, the magnitude of the materials.
Okay. The only other, two more things. One is we talked about procuring outside firms for random audits of lobbyists. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, we do that, right, Sandy, for both?
We use an outside firm to do the random selections. The audits are conducted by agency staff.
Would it be necessary to talk about how that happens? Why do we move firms to do a random selection of lobbyists that will be audited?
And the reason for that is so that there's no agency influence imputed in the selection of those individuals. Lobbyists who are selected for those filings that are selected.
So just not for this report, but for my own edification, we can do this offline too. But so how do we protect it against in the selection of the outside firms?
The firms that are doing the random selections for us. We select firms who are instructed pursuant to our control procedures. It's a protocol that has to be followed in making those selections in a blinded way, so that they are randomized.
We can talk about this later because I think it goes to the question you've been raising about our, what are we calling them these days? Not hearing officers, but there's another name for them. Arbitrators, right? So I'd just be, we can do it.
And it's a similar, it's a similar kind of,
Might be
it's usually an outside firm.
It might be good to go through the procurement process so we are aware of how we do this outside contracting.
Yes, and in fact, staff.
Right. And then my final comment, and I'll maybe say some more, but is that we note that since 2007, it looks like the lobbying expenditures have increased maybe over 2.5 times. I'm just curious if it's worth juxtaposing the increase in the state budget against that. So what's been the increase in the size of the state budget over that same period of time since 2007 to present? And are we adding more dollars to lobby for a smaller increase in the state budget? Does that make sense? Because I think there are all kinds of implications there, right?
But you could just have a measure. Inflation has increased X, the state budget has increased Y, and lobbying has increased Z. I don't know where those numbers come out, but it would be sort of an interesting concept.
That's all I have.
Are you saying for the report or for your own?
But maybe for our own, for now, well.
Okay.
I don't know.
No, it's
I just worry that we're getting into commentary.
It's a fact. So.
I just worry that if we do that, we're getting into commentary and by providing those numbers in the budget or in the report itself, we can certainly pull the data for you.
Commissioner Cardozo has just made the point that maybe these are just facts. So the fact is that the budget was X in 2007, the rate of inflation was Y, the current budget is Z. And lobbying was X amount in 2007, and it's currently 330 million plus. That's whatever kind of increase that is, I think of over 2 times what it was back in 2007. Let's just say that without commentary.
I think that those are relevant figures when you're reading these kind of statistics, aren't they?
I think
We can see if we can compare multi-axis chart.
right, because
The rate of inflation, rate of increase in state budget, and the growth.
I mean, and this is personal commentary, but I think the whole point of this commission, the whole point of an ethics commission generally is to try to protect the public against the undue influence of a whole lot of things, but particularly money. And so the more we can highlight the role that money is playing and how government is done, I think the better. Even if we don't give commentary, we can give the data.
We shouldn't say that the money should instead be spent for migrants or something like that.
No, definitely not. Particularly since it's private money.
So, But I'm now interested in what's our next step. I mean, we've given Emily the suggestions and within her schedule, she'll try to implement them. Is it realistic to think that given these suggestions that we're going to be ready to present a report in a week to the corporation? Not, what you feel, Sandy, time pressures.
We have a number of other projects that are active at this time. We'll take a shot. We're gonna have to recover that meeting, take a stab at what's going in town. Well, here it's not, don't have much time for commissioners to, the changes. Anyone to feel, it's a robust document, if we move it around, it's still going to be a very substantial document, and all of, even if we put the data into appendices, the data is really important. Now all of this data is, certainly available in various ways separately from the agency, but this is a collection that I think is quite valuable, and so we want to make sure that nothing gets lost in the transition. So we'll take a shot, but I think that would be right than rush.
Well, and the other question is, do we want as a committee to review this again? And then the other issue, which we haven't raised yet, is we have not yet circulated this to the rest of the commissioners. And we have not, so the commissioners think that they can get everything that's submitted to each committee. And that has not happened here. And we don't want to have this criticized. And so one of the potentials would be, after it's redrafted, Emily could send the redraft to both the committee and the commissioners. The committee would then have one more meeting about it beforehand, might ultimately lead to a more consensus-driven document.
So
That defines this as September.
yeah. I think that's a little bit.
But that said, let me just try to monopolize here for a minute. Given the scheduling problems that we have, if the revised report could be prepared so that we could have it, because we have another scheduled meeting of this committee on the 19th. If this committee could review the revised report on the 19th, even though we can't send it to the full commission, but apply for a meeting the next day, we can't have meetings in August. That's the last time we can do it.
I think it's very difficult. We also have to prepare our agenda this week's group. Commission meeting.
Do we have to approve, does the commission have to approve the annual report?
The way it's been structured, I don't know if we have to. Do we need us to approve?
As I previously said, it's a staff report, but it's a collaboration.
I'm just comfortable with, in my opinion, I don't think we have the time to review it a second time. I feel that we've given our comments, and the document, outside of the comments, it's a good document. And staff is well aware of what our issues are. And I'm comfortable with allowing them to make those responses. And we give it its endorsement without the whole committee going over it. If you want to go over it, you and Fred go over it, to say you've looked at it, I'm comfortable relinquishing that to the two of you. Because the document is in a good place, And I'd rather the document go before the commission with the blessing of the committee. And that means limiting the second read to a select number of people on the committee. I'm comfortable with standing back and letting somebody else do it.
So you're anticipating that the commission itself would approve this?
If it gets our blessing, I think it should. But I know what it is to rewrite. The comments we've each given her, it's gonna take a while to redo it. Circulate it amongst staff, it's gonna take another 6 weeks. In time for September, but in addition to all the other things they have to do. And I just don't, I don't think I don't think it's fair. I think next year, in hindsight, we start earlier and get commissioners' input at the beginning of the process. So staff has a sense of that, of what our wishes and concerns are before going into it. And lessons learned from this session. It won't be so difficult this year, but I'd rather get it out. And I know we're going to get it out well, because the first draft, I think, is very reflective of what we expected.
So you would simply give this to the commission for the September meeting, since it's a practical matter, they can't.
She's saying for the July, for next.
Well, but yeah, I don't know.
No, is that what you're saying, Claudia? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I don't think we can get, I think Sandy is saying.
The September meeting.
But we'll still go through the process, so by September, it's ready, and but,
I'll go with you. So I think what we're saying is that we're going to aim to submit the annual report to the September meeting. And draft is done, picking up Claudia's point, that perhaps Fred and I mean, I'd be happy to review it again, but we need to have another committee meeting. I invite comments.
I mean, I don't think we need to have another meeting, but we certainly could, it could be just,
Yeah, we could
distribute it to everyone, and if you have comments, send it to you.
Let me ask a question. How practical is it to redline or highlight the changes so that the commission is aware of the changes that are being proposed?
Sure, I can fairly quickly make these changes to the document. I think the biggest lift, honestly, is doing that data research for the chart on page 47, because we'd have to find that data and recreate that whole chart, and moving the lobbying section to the end, which is going to cause reformatting issues. So things like that, redlining would be a little difficult, but you would know that, and that's going to be the most time consuming. These sentence changes here and there, I can certainly, I won't track change them, but I can put them in red text so you can see, just because I feel like track changes isn't as readable, but so you can see what the changes were, I can do that easily, yes.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Just to restate the consensus, that when Emily is done, she will send a red line version to this committee. And committee members would then send their comments to me. Or Fred,
To you, that's fine.
and then subject to.
Committee, right, to the full committee, not to the full committee.
Commit to the four of us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just,
And then,
Send our comments to him.
and then,
right, but I wanted them all, I want us all to see each other's comments.
yeah, right. And then when that's done, subject to whatever further input, and we will put it in final. And then we'll send it and perhaps the red line to the full commission for the September meeting. Is that?
Yes.
I wouldn't put, I don't know, I'm wondering about sending the red line to the full committee. It's an invitation to edit.
Well,
I would say send.
You're saying, because not your commission, I'm sorry.
I mean, to the commission, to the full commission. I would say, let us edit our red line. We should get the red lines. Make the edits. Make it an early draft. Use the term early draft, and let the full commission read it and say it's been read by the commission, by the Communications Commission. It's got its endorsement. Unless there are any major concerns, we'd like to present this for final submission to blah, blah, blah. So people, if you really have to say something, but 6 of us have read it 3 times.
Well, I agree with you. What I'm concerned about is I don't agree that all the members of the commission should be involved in every committee meeting, because I think that slows us down. And the idea that you're gonna have 11 or 10 people revising a 125-page report is ridiculous. And that's really what you're talking about.
Trying to avoid, yeah.
So, but we don't even have to decide that yet. We'll get the red line from Emily, and we can then decide how to proceed. Okay, so we done with this subject? We've got a lot of other things to cover.
So just a couple of questions. So I'm wondering about, because we're changing the whole order of, you're suggesting that you should order through it. And just wondering how that kind of, how easy it is to follow and how easy it is to do it, the red line. Most, a lot of this will become now appendixes, right?
Yeah.
Emily?
I'm having a little trouble hearing. I'm sorry. It's cutting in and out a little bit.
So I'm just wondering that we talked about a lot of this becoming appendixes, is that right? Like a lot of the beginning introduction part will now be in appendixes?
I think just the bios, the full bios.
Then we said page 42 to 70 something. The lobbying schedules would also be put into.
That's just too changed.
All right, so okay, I'm just trying.
Okay, so Emily, again, on this point, thank you very, very much. And when you're done, you just send it to Fred and me and Sandy, or send it to all of us, I'm sorry. And then everyone will send their comments back to me. Fair?
Now, what's the time frame for that?
When Emily is done.
It will be.
I think,
Meeting, but it's, Emily,
August?
She said
no,
that.
I was just going to say, given that the commission meeting is coming up and we might have another committee meeting next week, I can probably get most of the edits done this week, but I'm sure Sandy's going to want to look at it again and other staff might need to look at it again. And with the commission meeting coming up, I would think we'd be able to get it back to you after the commission meeting. Does that sound fair, Sandy?
Yes.
So we're saying before
I
we
will
get
find the time after I get it to review it here.
Okay.
Okay?
So the end of the month.
Okay. So, we done with this subject? Because we have
Yeah.
major, all right, the next subject then, Emily, could you get the people working on the FOIL issue, let them know they should, if they can, to join us?
They are here.
Oh, they're here.
This is Jennifer Bliss, one of our associate counsels, and Megan Matula is walking right back in. She stepped out for a minute and she drafted the regs. So they are here and they are ready to go.
Oh, Keith is here too. Great. Okay. This is a very different subject. So we have the proposed regulations that were on the agenda from but we decided to table them so that we could discuss this as a commission. And while I think these regulations are very well put forth, given the underlying arguments, particularly of reinvent Walden, I think we should take a look at it. And as I see it, the biggest challenge is, do we be sure that things that should be on our website, so people don't have to ask for it by a FOIL request, how do we deal with that? This is, I don't know, I can start the call, but maybe Jen or whoever drafted it wants to give a brief introduction of how this all came about.
So I'm Megan, I'm the one who drafted them. So how it came about was that, per statute, we are required to have regulations pertaining to FOIL. So once the law passed, we regrouped in the summer, tried to come up with what we wanted and the regulations. And then I was on maternity leave, so when I came back, I drafted them, and you kind of have what you have. It was a collaboration between myself, Sandy, Keith, and Michael at the time, because Jen came in later on the FOIL stuff. So we did originally look at the Committee on Open Government model rules, and there was kind of debate whether or not we should just kind of incorporate the complete model rules into our regulations. But that was decided to we changed that path a little bit, and then created what we have. So we did look at the Committee on Open Government's model rules when we were drafting these.
We also looked at what other similar agencies, if you will, had in the way of their FOIL regulations. For example, OAG, Inspector General. I think, Megan, you looked at Department of Health, severe familiarity.
Yep.
And we may have looked at a few more to get an idea of how other agencies were dealing
I also
with
think,
regulations.
I also believe I looked at a few other agencies that have kind of commissions like we do, or ran like similar to how we are. I believe I looked at the liquor authorities as well as OPMs, because they kind of have an executive director and a commission that runs them.
Well, we're totally unfamiliar with both the open meetings, what the Committee on Open Meetings Law suggested, what the other committees do. How did you draw the distinctions? I mean, why not, for example, I'm just asking you out of ignorance, why didn't you just adopt all the changes that the Open Meetings Law Committee had suggested? I gather you didn't, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but how did you make that judgment?
One prime reason is that, unlike many other agencies, we have constraints on information that we can make available that are right in the statute. A good deal of what we do has to do with providing guidance. That's statutorily confidential. A good deal of what we have to do involves processing complaints, acting on them, bringing enforcement matters. Those are also statutorily confidential, and in many respects outside of FOIL. So we try to adapt and balance, on the one hand, the imposed confidentiality that we have to deal with, on the one hand, and the desire for transparency and complying with FOIL on the other. I think we struck, and Megan, spent a lot of time into this, we struck a good balance between in terms of the question of what we put on the website to make available. That's what the statute calls for. We make all of that information available. That's dictated by the statute or statutes available on our website. In addition, for example, we make the lobbying data available on the website through the search capabilities that we have. And Carol and her group are working with ITS to take that whole body of lobbying data and actually put it, I think it's on the OpenNY database. It's a heavy lift because it's a large amount of data. So we're doing that. I guess independently of the regulations. The regulations deal with how you deal with FOIL.
I think that those are two very separate questions, because if there is data that could be put on the website, and there's no statutory prohibition, I have the question, how do we decide that we won't put it on the website, or that we're working on it, but it's not reflected in today, at least according to Reinvent Albany, a lot of data that could be on the website and therefore moot the FOIL issue. How do we make those decisions as to what we don't put on the website?
Well, for example,
One thing I want to mention is,
go ahead.
I was just going to say the lobbying data that we are trying to transfer to Open NY is on our website as of now. It's just another place to put it and have it all in one central warehouse, is my understanding. So if you go to our lobbying database, our public search query, you can find a wealth of information on lobbying. I believe that this letter is asking for it to also be on Open Data NY. So, and that is something that's in process, but as Sandy said, it is a very huge amount of data, and just trying to transfer that data from us to them is causing a lot of headaches. So it's not something that you can just be like, oh, here you go, here's our data. You know, it's something that's been worked on since I've been here, and they're experiencing a lot of challenges with that.
I'm just curious. So Sandy said this in passing, and I want to see if I can get a little bit more clarity about it. We put data on the website that is not required by the statute, which I think is a good thing, right? In principle.
Hyundai Kona versus Honda HRV.
Can we
Look
talk
what
about
Kona
what
has.
those,
And
we don't
what
have to do it now, but at some point talk about what those categories of data are that we provide, that the statute doesn't mandate? And are there other categories of data that we will provide, or that perhaps we should consider providing, that we are currently providing, that the statute does not prohibit or command that we provide? Does that make sense? Does that?
Yes, I mean, in terms of the data that the public would be interested in, for example, the law data, a very large data set. We constructed, Carol and her group built, and are still building, improving, an application that has a very robust search capability. Underlying that is a huge amount of data. And we have the search capability. We report on the data in the annual report. We have got FOIL requests now for the underlying data. And in response to that, we are now looking at making the entire data set available outside of our application. So that's something the statute doesn't require us to do, but we're doing that proactively because we have gotten requests.
Right.
And we don't have an issue. We don't have a conceptual issue with providing. It turns out there are technical issues in providing the data in a meaningful way.
So so I'm not focused on the technology. I'm trying, in the one instance, for us to be able to brag a little bit about what we're doing beyond what the statute requires. And I just want to understand it by category. So, and I don't even know what those categories would be, but understand it by category. So the statute requires this, we're going above and beyond, and we're providing this kind of data.
Yeah.
We anticipate that we'll also be able to provide this kind of data at some point down the road. If that doesn't exist, then you can just say, this is as much as we're going to be able to do. But I'd just like to know what that is. And I'd also like to know if there's any potential data that we can provide that we're currently not providing that isn't demanded or prohibited by the statute.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, in a different context, we're going to propose to commissioners that the informal guidances in redacted form, to the extent they can be redacted now, inadvertently identifying individuals who are making requests. We would like to begin making those available regularly through the website, for example. You can search for formal advisory opinions, going back to the beginning of the ethics structure and the lobbying structure are accessible through the website. We want to improve the search capabilities. So right now, very limited, from our perspective, search capability. We need to do a series of conversions. It's going to take time and money to do that, programming time and conversions on. We would like to make those words searchable, for example. We want to put links. So if a particular advisory opinion or case is cited in those, currently you can't just click on it and get to the site. So we want to make those available. So that's additional information. And it goes above and beyond what the statute our statute, section 94.
And I just think a summary of that, I'm not, so if I bump into somebody from reInvent Albany and they say, can you tell me exactly what you're providing that the statute doesn't require? I want to be able to tick that off.
Right. If I might interject to questions that were raised, and this is Keith here speaking, to questions that were raised by both chairs, both the committee chair, Commissioner Cardozo, and the commission chair, Chair Davey, with respect to these buckets of data, the lobbying bucket or the lobbying data bucket, the advice and guidance data bucket. There's another big bucket that hasn't been mentioned that I think as a commission and even as staff, we still have to wrestle with, is the financial disclosure data bucket. By law, we're required to post the statewide electeds. We are also under a requirement to post the financial disclosure statements of the members of the state legislature. But the law does not either require or prohibit this commission from posting and making public everyone else's, every other filer's disclosure statement. For those who have filed, there is still some uncertainty that we've got to work through on how much of that available, but not sort of very well publicized information, how we deal with that, whether, again, to your question, whether that reflects another kind of unnamed bucket of information that law or regulation neither requires us to post or prohibits us from posting. And so the question remains, should we post it? Is there value in posting it, even though we're not required to or prohibited from? We've got to work through that very big issue, I think.
Just by way of clarity, we do provide those on request.
Right.
And we're required to provide those on request. So the issue that Keith is alluding to is whether the requirement that we provide them relates to the larger workforce who file financial disclosure statements. We can, because we're certainly not required to post them on the website as we are for members of the legislature, statewide elected officials.
But those are the big, I think those are the big questions that we need to wrestle with as a commission. It's not required.
Can I just, go ahead.
If it's,
I just wanted to, one thing, go ahead, sorry. Go ahead.
So if it's not required, it's not prohibited, then what do we do with it? Now, right now, on request, for some of the data, we're providing it, but should we just have it on the website? And so I think, and if there are other categories like that, let's find a time to talk about them and reach some decisions on it.
Can I just interject?
I apologize. Let me just interrupt you for a brief second, because it goes to the question of how proactive we can be or ought to be with respect to disclosing information. Again, it centers around the extent to which we can be proactive. Commissioners have wanted us to be proactive. At the public hearing, we heard how important it was for us to be proactive. So here's an example of how we might sort of apply this new modus operandi in sharing as much information and again, making state government as transparent as possible. Emily?
Set an
Yeah, I
example
just want to say,
for the highest court of the land on how it's done.
Yes.
the one thing we need to consider when we're talking about making 38,000 employees' financial disclosure statements available on our website is the technical side of that, because that is not something you can just flip a switch and they will be there on our website. That would probably require a lot of an IT consultant to do that and come with a cost. And I imagine that would be something that we would have to explore. So even when you're considering these things of, would it be nice if we could put this on the website? It may or may not be, depending on what the policy determinations. We also need to think about the practical side of these things and how we can do that, given that we have several IT projects already in the hopper with these consultants that are priority as of now, right? That we have consultants for 3 years that we need them to get done. So I want to just throw that out there because maybe there's things we would like, but we need to be realistic. Is this a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year thing? We need to ask for more money, like that type of consideration.
And I know that there are models at the federal level of government that we could easily look to inform us.
So, that obviously not something we're going to decide today, but certainly we should look at whether we want to include agency heads and other policymakers at a minimum, rather than 3,000 state employees.
Correct.
Is there a way to create an internal list of the, should we be going to the trouble of putting the following on our website? And you list 10 items.
That's what I'm asking.
And reasonable people can differ, but I think I'm feeling very ignorant at the moment as to what those may be. And I think that would help us make a better judgment, because there's a cost factor, a delay factor, and then there's importance. And so I don't think we're not capable of making those decisions today. And is that a feasible way to start attacking this problem?
That was my question.
That's your right.
That's my question. So actually, I think maybe let me say it's not a question. I would like for staff to, commissioners and staff, vehemently object, to either produce that list or come up with a plan for producing it, or tell us it can't be done. And I realize Emily and everybody has a ton of things on their agenda, so if you tell us you can't do it until November, at least we'll know it's coming. But I do think Commissioner Cardozo I agree with him wholeheartedly, there should be that list of things that we need to make a decision about. But we need to know what that list is.
I would add, though, to that, again, this is Reinvent Albany, I don't know if they're right or not, that some of the things in the open meetings law group's proposal, why don't we include that? Why don't we include that data? And then there's some other issues that are raised in the Reinvent Albany discussion that also say, put this on your website. And I'm not saying we made the wrong decision. I want to emphasize that. I just feel totally ignorant at the moment of what we should or shouldn't do in that connection.
Well, let me just say broadly, the purpose of the FOIL regulations is to provide requesters of information with the framework pursuant to which they can make requests in accordance with the FOIL statutes. And it states the procedures that, will be followed in complying with those requests. Underlying all of this, at least from the FOIL perspective, is the mandate that we're subject to, prior ethics agencies have not been subject to, that we comply with the requirements of FOIL. And that's what the regulations implement. They don't get into the broader policy question of when proactively information of every category or quality should be proactively made available because they might be requested under FOIL. They don't exclude that. I intended to exclude the proactive.
But I think what we're saying is, great, we're going to do what FOIL requires. But you've also said you're doing things beyond what the statutes, whatever relevant statutes are. And we should be able to talk about that with some degree of intelligence. But also, what are those other things that, to Commissioner Cardozo's point, that should be on that list? And what's the process for considering them?
Absolutely, and staff will prepare that list. What I'm saying, the FOIL regulations guide compliance by the agency with FOIL. And we believe, staff believes, that we have put together a set of regulations that not only fully comply with FOIL, but also are consistent with the spirit of FOIL.
But I mean, Reinvent Albany quotes something that people's right to know, et cetera, and it shouldn't be worded by shrouding it with a cloak of secrecy. And the simple answer to say, well, you can serve a FOIL request to find out the name of the record access officer, just to use an
It's on a
example.
website.
But they didn't know that at the time. But, you know, there is a line to be drawn if it's that's why basically you think of FOIL, I think of FOIL in the context of litigation or quasi-litigation. But if they're basic policy matters that are FOIL requests that are coming in repeatedly for the same kind of document, we should know that and say, hey, if we've got 40 FOIL requests this year for subject X, that easily could have been posted on the website.
That's what I was gonna say.
That, you know, the fact that they could have served the FOIL request is not the full answer. But I'm totally ignorant as to what I'm talking about.
No, all I'm saying is, I certainly don't disagree with that. In fact, it makes perfect sense. And as I said, one reason it makes sense, although it's going to be costly and time consuming, to take the lobbying data and put it on another vehicle is because it's more efficient from an agency perspective to have it out there. FOIL specifically allows you to refer to data that's available publicly. You can say, go to our website. Here's the URL of the tab or whatever, so you can obtain it in an acceptable way. All I'm saying is the regulations don't inhibit any of that. They provide the procedures and the basis upon which coordinate with the statute. We will comply with FOIL requests.
So you're encouraging this committee to recommend to the full commission that we adopt these set of regulations and record access.
I have a couple of unrelated questions.
Okay, I'm just asking him.
Yes.
Any of that sort of-
I do. It's very strong. And it doesn't mean they can't be changed in the fall or whenever in the future if they're not working to the commission's satisfaction or the public's satisfaction.
So I think one of the suggestions for Reinvent Albany, the guidelines or the regulations that we are proposing really are based upon the old way of doing business. That everything is on paper and they can come and review them. Shouldn't we have and maybe you do it already, but it's not, I don't think, I didn't see it in the regulations, a methodology for sending out by email what the document.
Absolutely. And the regulations and the statute require the agency, again, to comply with the request in the form and format requested by the requester. And that may have condensed, it may be a little bit.
Maybe I missed that.
But you know, if somebody wants data in the form in which you keep it and you can provide it to them on a thumb drive rather than printing it out, then you would provide it on a thumb drive.
That's great.
But do we say that though? Because I mean, do we say that in here?
I didn't see it.
It's in the statute. We have to.
No, but it's not in here. I didn't see it in here, in our regs. Maybe I missed it, but I didn't see it.
But the regs don't circumvent the statute. They're required by the statute.
But we're talking about the procedures that we're going to use. But don't we want to include that? We talk about it.
I don't think it's necessary to go to repeat what the statute says in the regulations.
And I'm thinking we're making the public go to the statute. Why can't it be right there?
I don't think we've had a single issue with a request of format. Emily, have we had difficulty with requesters asking for data in particular formats?
The only time we've had not like your typical one, like if they want it in Excel, we give it in Excel. If they want it in PDF, we give it in PDF. If they want it in like a, it's called an CSV file, and a lot of our lobbying data is available this way as well on our website. They can take that and import it into their own database. The only time we've had a problem with this is like similar to the open.gov, Sandy, when they request all the underlying data and it's just too large of a file. But yeah, typically if they're asking for something in a spreadsheet, we'll provide it in a spreadsheet, not a PDF.
The argument
Does that
that
answer your question?
They still rely on paper more than digital communications, so that makes things very difficult from a FOIL perspective. When you paragraph 3 of their letter. Should we be doing more?
Oh, I think that has to do with the language being where it says public inspection. It doesn't mean, so if someone sends in a FOIL request and says, I want to see this person's FDS, I have to redact that, or someone has to redact that, right? I don't do hand redact that and then make them come in and look at that piece of paper. I redact it in Adobe and I email it to them. I don't say, you have to come in and look at this. No, that would not be an efficient use
But-
of time.
But that language is in there because there are some people who still want to
Right.
come in and inspect. So we give our address and the hours in which we would allow for the inspection if they do choose that.
Just ask a question about the hours.
Okay.
Is there for the time for the location? Why is it only available in Albany?
Yeah, I'm
We
sorry.
couldn't hear that question come through.
Why is it only available in Albany? In section 5,
Oh,
it says that I think it's available in Albany. It doesn't make reference to New York City at all.
I believe we did talk about that when we were drafting the regulations, and I believe that it was, if I remember correctly, it's because Albany is our main hub where the majority of our documents are. So that's where we.
I just think I think that, at least from my perspective, we want to be as open and available to the public as possible. That's our primary responsibility, I think, is making sure we are accountable and accessible to the public. And so when we say that if you want to come to the office and view it, you can drive up to Albany because that's where our main office is. The public's down here, and why don't they have a choice? Even, and I was saying, well, maybe you can't have 2 truckloads of materials in different places. Well, do it by appointment. But there should be access at both places so that for people who live downstate can have it. And I fully agree with Commissioner Seymour in that we want to, every opportunity we can, we want to communicate how diverse we are in making information available. Online for online people, copies for hard copy people, in person for in-person people. And we want to be good because the public perception is that listen to this. I have to laugh at this one. You can pay by check or money order. You can't spell check anymore. People don't use checks. And you got to pay for a money order. Now, there are some people who depend on money orders and checks. We want to have, online capability to pay, cellular ability to pay, and the old folks way of doing it by check and money order. And as often as we can reiterate that in everything that we do, people begin to see that we are not so broken.
Is there a way to say in the regs that we're proposing that we're continuing to update this and add additional information either to the website or to make it easier? It's sort of preparatory language and it would be a press release, but is there any way to incorporate that so that people don't think this is the end of it? Does that make sense?
We can come up with a preamble, I suppose, that would express that.
The question.
No, I was just going to say that this has been to be as accommodating as possible, both in terms of
But it's
the
not,
forms of request and the way we provide the information. In terms of physically providing records, apart from where they're physically kept, if somebody wants to go through physical records, that, we would have a cost allocation if you have to deal with, as you say. We have to show.
How much do we do that? How many, how often do people come in to
It
review?
happens periodically where there's no other meaningful way of complying with a request.
And
So we have to
periodically
do that.
means, what does periodically mean? If we're talking about a month or a week,
No, I wouldn't say it's that frequently. It's a couple times a year.
that people
I
actually
mean,
come in.
in my experience, it's only been a couple of,
And as far as
3, maybe 4 times
that they've
in
come,
that period of time that they've had to come, just otherwise required.
and to Claudia's point, how hard would that be to have access in New York City?
Well, and the only instances I'm familiar with were instances in which the requesters were in Albany and they wanted to look at the records in Albany. That was independent of the regulations.
It would require shipping boxes of documents, at the end of the day, if that's what it meant, down to New York City, right? Paying or someone physically driving them.
let me just see the picture. We have the hard copy stuff on paper. I'm assuming they're also online. So if someone made a request, they want to view it in the New York office. Could we not print out what they want for the New York office? They have to actually take the hard boxes and ship them down.
We have categories of records that are only in hard copy that have been digitized.
But they could be.
They could be.
At an expense.
At an expense we're looking at. I'd like to have everything digitized.
So then one of our goals at some point is going to be to digitize everything. It's going to take 10 years to do it. I just think that we have to stop, we have to move away from this stagnant perception. This is where we are. And unless what comes in is going to be something, we need to move, we need to show that we're moving into this new into technology. Even if it's a phased-in process over a 10-year period. So when someone calls and says, I want 30 boxes and I want to see it in New York, you can say it's going to cost us that. We can't do that this year, but it's on our timetable for you to be able to do that in year 2030.
I think you're right, but I think the more overwhelming question is, why did I have to serve a FOIL request to begin with? Why wasn't it, for a lot of this information, why wasn't it already on your website?
Because we have the money to put it on there.
Well, that may be the reason, but I don't know. I mean, I feel very, very ignorant
Yeah.
about.
Well, the answer is, in those instances where the information has been given to us in not digital form. It's remained, there are some exceptions, where we
But it
do
is-
more modest ways
But it's doable.
digitized.
I'm doing some research for this organization and I'm running into data from the federal government, more Lord have mercy. But it tells you not, it's like build a database. Build a database. It's confusing. It's very confusing for me. But, I can ask for any combination of data that I want, plug in the numbers and it pops out. And that's where we need to be. And I just think that, we should have a list on our website. Here's all the categories of things that we have. And if you want to see something, you can build a database on it and put the pieces in place to make that happen. Now, I can imagine how long that would take and how expensive and how that's going to cost. But as we argue for additional funding for our program, and as we try to achieve the expectations set by the legislature and the executive office, we need to be thinking about ways in which we can justify those increases by arguing the case of moving into the information age in a meaningful way.
Yeah, well, the Greenbelt Albany letter says, Jacob was exempted from FOIL and therefore had a list of information that was disclosable. The emphasis now should be on proactive disclosure of information and reduce the need for FOIL requests by posting more data on data.ny.gov. That's, now, if it's too expensive or if it's impractical, I think we should talk about it and say, all right, if it's too expensive, we can't do it, or we have to budget it out. If it's impractical, fine, but otherwise, why aren't we putting this on? And I don't know what information I should be asking about. So I think picking up Keith's point, if we can take a list of the various areas of potential information and then, discuss it with a group of staff and some of us, so we can have a reasonable dialogue, what's practical and what's not. Because I think what we're all saying is we want to disclose more, recognize the impracticalities of some of this, and so let's try to reach a consensus on the point.
I guess the question is like how where it would be looking at the FOIL request, right? And we would be able to understand what people want, right? Like how do they fall in? What's the biggest request that we get?
Yeah, we have, I'm sure that between Keith and Michael Sand, who worked on this for a while, and Emily and the others here, they could brainstorm and come up in effect with a list. And so we can then sit down and have a discussion as to what's practical, what's impractical. Maybe there's a couple of things that we could do tomorrow. I have no idea.
Yeah.
And there's things we could phase, such as what Seymour suggested on financial disclosure forms. We do them for agency heads and deputies and, not try to do them right away for the other 30,000 plus employees. But we need that list.
And then we save at the end in terms of personnel, going through these and producing. But you're looking at me, what?
No, we respond, we still have to respond to requests. We have a
Right,
sort of
of course we do,
responsibility to be
yeah.
responsive to FOIL. So the answer may be, you can find it on our website in particular instances, but we would still have to go through the request.
Related
And because we do, I was just going to say, because we do have protected information. The fact that somebody's asking for something in a FOIL request doesn't mean that we don't still have an obligation to maintain confidentiality, but we're required to do it. And it may mean, depending on the request, having to review and redact large volumes of information.
I guess related to this is how long does it take as a practical matter for us to respond to the various FOIL requests? I appreciate now we're meeting the 5-day requirement and the 20-day requirement. But as a practical matter, is it taking us months, weeks? Are there only a couple of types of things that take us a long time? I don't have a feel as to how quickly we are really complying with a FOIL request, because that's the immediate issue. Because none of these other solutions are going to happen overnight.
It really varies greatly depending on the request, right? If it's a FOIL request for like an FDS record, we can usually turn that around in a day or two. If it's, 20 FDS records, that's going to take time. So we got to pull them all and keep in mind we need to redact them all. So it really, and if it's like emails, involving this search term and this search term, or this search term or that search term, then we have to get ITS involved and run a search for all the emails and then review all the emails to see which ones are responsive versus which ones are not responsive, and then redact all of those. So it really greatly is varied on the request. And, if you are interested, I'm happy to sit down with you and go over our FOIL log so you can kind of see the scope of the request, what we put in for the timeframes, depending on the nature of the request, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that should be helpful, yeah.
Because I think, and maybe a very independent issue, but I think we have to assuming the FOIL request is a lawful request, we have to be sure we are responding to it. That may be a totally different issue, because most of these things are different kind of categories. So if you want the emails of 15 different people, we're not going to get that on the website no matter what. So that's a different kind of request. It's the way then to do this is to recommend adoption of these regulations, but hopefully including something in it that we're adding or working on it. But at the same time, if Keith and his group would come up with a list of subject matters that we want to think about, should we put this on the web, go to the trouble of putting it on the website? I think that would be it.
We'll provide that.
Okay.
I just have one question. The 5 days, and the, I guess, 20 days, is that, did we come up with those numbers or is that statutory?
Statutory. And we can add a provision to make it clear that we're complying with the obligation under FOIL to provide information digitally if that's how it's requested, as long as the statutory formula is met.
I think if we can do that work, again, and I know how much pressure we have for next week's meeting, but if we could, one of our, more of us could see the revised regs on that concept before the meeting to make sure that we can comfortably recommend adoption. I think.
Yeah, and I would see too, if we can do that without resetting the clock, for the adoption. So we'll go with that question, some ministerial change or something. But it does reflect our practice.
That would also include my concerns about the locations of where the available hard data would be available. Change the language to include different forms of access electronically and et cetera. Your native processes.
So anything else on this moment? Since it's 1 o'clock, we have other issues to discuss, but should we take a break here? We have, yeah. But let me just say that Keith and the other FOIL experts on this, we appreciate your help and joining us. With any questions on what we've talked about, just don't hesitate to give me a call, and I'll stay in touch with you. I think after lunch, what I'd like to do is talk about the committee issues. I don't know, at the public meeting issue, maybe Keith, whoever should stay on the line while we talk about that. But and Emily, I don't mean to exclude you, but it seems to be an indispensable part of this committee. But why don't we take a 20-minute break or so while we have.
Okay, and I've got media services on the line, so I'll just let you know when we're clear. We're all set to. you're live.
All right. Thank you very much. We're now, thank you for everyone coming back. We're now moving to the third agenda item, which is the public hearing recommendations and where we go from there. And thank you, Sandy and staff, for creating this very helpful document that we now have in front of us, laying things out. And what I'm not, I'd like to start with, to the extent that the Communications Committee is listed as the quote, secondary division, what is it that they're going to be asked to do? Whether we want to work with others because we think this is an item that we should pursue, or say to people we don't think it should be pursued? What exactly is our challenge?
With respect to these, well, from my perspective, the concept of secondary is it would have an impact on the communication side. These items would have an impact.
But what is it we're being asked to do? So let's say, yes, we have an
Item by item.
yeah. So what is it, to taking the first one, require online publication of the judge's financial disclosure statements?
I mean, that would in particular would generally be regarded as well outside our jurisdiction, because we're talking about financial disclosures that judges file, unlike those filed by the executive branch,
Right.
policymakers and threshold filers and members of the legislature and state elected officials. The judicial FDSs are not.
No, I drafted that statute, so I'm familiar with that. But what is the question?
We're being asked to support such an amendment.
And so we should have a discussion here on each of the items where communications is listed, whether we think we should or we should not. And if we should not, I guess that's the end of it. And if we should, then we should be talking about how do we go about advocating that?
Correct. Can I ask a clarifying question? Are you referring to where communications is the primary? Or where communications is the secondary? There's no such thing. So can communications then make, what if the, let's see, never mind.
Communications here is secondary, not because of the policy implications so much as the practical implications. You now have hundreds of judicial FDSs that the agency, assuming they're handled like FOIL requests, so there'd be individual responses to FOIL requests for particular judges, actual disclosure statements that the agency would have to handle. Have to go through the production process, the production process. Or if a decision is made that these should be propagated online, go through the process every year of redacting them in some kind of vehicle that would be accessible.
But, well, maybe we should just go through each one of these where communications is listed and decide, what we want to do. I mean, to take, I guess the first one for us is, what Evan Davis suggested on commissioners personally participating. Right? So we should discuss. We should discuss what we think of that suggestion. Is that basically it? Yeah. What do we think of?
Education, isn't the primary group education on this? It says ethics training is education, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the issues that has been addressed.
So it should say to me that, but that wouldn't be your first
Well, no, that's,
ethics we would defer that to ethics or education.
I guess my question is, what should we do today on this subject?
It seems to me that we want to focus on subjects where the The communications committee is the primary.
Well, then we can end this discussion.
There are not, there are none.
Uh,
Well, let me phrase it this way. It has implications for communications. Obviously, the training group, the education committee, have a primary interest in it because it's going to impact how the trainings are presented. If you have a commissioner present, you're going to have to introduce the commissioner, say something about the commissioner. The commissioner will have to say something that's consistent with the educational purpose of the training session. On the other hand, I think one of their motives, one of Kevin Davis's reasons for proposing is he thinks it's important for the commissioners to present the message that they are actively and individually engaged in everything the commission does, including training. And the training is especially important.
So, okay, so we'll take a vote.
I know you recommended that, but we have people who we hired who have the skill of training. That's why they're there. For us to take over some of that responsibility, to me, would be inadvisable, actually, because we don't have the expertise that they have.
When we looked at that question, we didn't look at it from the perspective of taking it over. We looked at it from the perspective of having a lived experience.
I mean,
A lived experience. In other words, just having to see what our clients or the consumers are going through and show our presence there. And the questions for us are real in that, well, does that mean we should subject ourselves to answering questions? Are we prepared?
Just observe.
Just there to observe. And the question is, how do we handle being in the presence of some of these off-site meetings and not being prepared to respond? Or should we respond? How should we respond?
you're also sending a message to the attendees about the importance of understanding the training, because look, we're showing up.
Right. So the reason why I say the lead, the primary committee should first talk about how they plan to resolve it. And based on that, then I think we would chime in terms of the role communications committee would play in helping facilitate that.
Well, can we, for the sake of maybe my education, do a hypothetical then? Let's say the education committee agrees that we should do this training.
Yes.
Then hypothetically, at least at this point, what would communications do? What are some possibilities that the communications would do in response to that recommendation by the education committee?
Well, what we would actually put forth the recommendation regarding this very issue.
Say that.
We put forth the recommendation with regarding, and we do want to encourage, I mean, you did the narrative.
Right, I did.
Changes on that. But I would think that we should sit with or have a conversation with communications, dealing with some of those issues that have been posed by the staff. How do we prepare ourselves to respond to questions out in the field? You know, what kind of support will we have?
The we being commissioners.
We being commissioners. When we're there, will Emily assist us via WebEx to be responsible for questions and answers? Would you be there?
I had thought in part it was to enable us to see whether changes should be made in ethics training. But in fact, because I took the online course that's offered and I found it unsatisfactory and didn't know what to do with my view. But that's not the purpose of this.
I don't think so.
I'm not arguing it, I'm just asking.
I think the question is to hear how it's being received. If folks say it's unsatisfactory, here are the reasons why. We have firsthand information as to what that is. We're not there to resolve it or to respond to it or to justify it. It's just to experience it, be knowledgeable about how it's being received and report back to the commission our findings
Based on what we observed.
based on our observations.
But to the extent they're online, live trainings, you could observe, you could watch a recording, you make a recording, in terms of that. And that might be an efficient way to get a select sample as opposed to an isolated sample. We also talked about the possibility, if a commissioner message is important, to have commissioner vignettes that could be incorporated into the presentation. Hello, I'm Commissioner so-and-so, and I would stress how important ethics training is and how much effort the agency has put into the training, et cetera.
It should look a combination of different ways, online and also, I also see the value of doing it in person, being there in person, but it does subject us to some degree of vulnerability because not only may we not be prepared, we want to make sure that our response is consistent with what staff is trying to communicate.
Or whether it's feasible or advisable for us to respond at all sessions, just to say we're here as observers, between because we could get into some very deep water, I would think, pretty quickly.
It's an interesting discussion, but what happens now? What are we supposed to do? I'm not looking at you, but, okay, we have this, it's an interesting subject, have a couple of tweaks, but now what?
I kind of think you have to wait till the other committees come forward.
Well, the two committees are talking to each other right now.
Okay.
What else do you want from me? No, seriously, I guess I'm asking, what's the next step?
Policy on, you gave us nice policy with regard to how you recommend commissioners respond to the press, right? Give us the same kind of recommendation. How would you like commissioners who participate in on-site training, how would you like us to respond? What kind of support do you think we should seek from communications and DeSantis?
But seriously, so now what do I do as the chairman of the committee? What am I supposed to
Give
do?
me some advice, preferably.
No, but seriously, do I write a paragraph? Do I write a page? Do we have a committee meeting on it? What?
I wonder, are we supposed to be commenting on, or we're discussing the recommendations? Is that, like whether or not we're willing to do that, or we think it's a good idea to be, part of, is that what we should be doing? Talking about whether or not that's a good recommendation and whether we want to adopt it and how we want to proceed.
So I write it.
Not, you don't have to write anything. I think it's here already.
Well, the staff the staff has a consideration to include video clips as I read it.
Right.
But
Like, are you, I guess education would have the first step about, whether the education committee thinks this is a good idea and we should implement it. And I guess communications would.
See, when we did our deliberations, we did not have this document to discuss primary and secondary responsibilities. So we probably need to get Keith's input on this since he
you have
did.
one?
Keith, because he put this together, right?
He's right over there.
Where's Keith?
Right there.
So what do you want us to do with this?
Here I am. I'm sorry. I was distracted for a moment. What was the question?
My question is, on behalf of the communications committee, what is it that we're supposed to do, the communications committee, to say it's a good idea, to say what role we think we should take?
If I might be so blunt, my opinion, which you've asked, is that the communications committee do nothing right now because it's not the primary committee. I think, as I think I heard Commissioner Edwards suggesting, perhaps it's the primary committee who really ought to weigh in on this first, and then the communications committee as the secondary committee wait to receive whatever additional questions the education committee or the education may have raised, or in more practical terms, it's now the communications committee with the blessing of the education committee now figures out, okay, how do we make that work? How do we, and what is it going to look like? How do we make it look like something that works effectively? That's I think what you want to be doing, but only when the education committee tells you we're ready to enlist your assistance or collaboration on this particular item.
Now, I agree with that when it comes to communications. I don't agree with that, the way you outlined education.
You don't agree that it's a primary responsibility of,
I think that some of the stuff he's laid out is really educational.
communications?
Yeah, I mean, communication. Now, I was saying, moving away from communications responsibility, just talking about this document. The way you describe how communications and education would interact for the first question, I'm saying that makes sense for me. But when I use that logic and apply it on some of the other non-communications assignments, and looking at my own, I think it's different. I don't necessarily think it makes sense. Like in terms of the training, you're saying that ethics and lobbying takes that lead. I mean, you take the lobbying committee takes that lead, right?
What are you looking at?
I'm looking at, you have lobbying for SSAE. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the bottom. You have our primary committee lobbying and education.
I think what part of the confusion here is that these are units and divisions of the office, not committees.
You're talking about category, Fred?
I see, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong column. Yep.
I don't know if it's primary committee
I'm
lobbying.
sorry, yeah. I wonder-
Secondary committee is education.
I think I agree with Keith. I think the primary committee should be coming up with whatever policy changes we want. And then secondary committee, in discussing how that can be rolled out or how it can be implemented, at least for this particular item, because I don't think communication shouldn't be really talking about. First of all, you got to decide whether you want the commissioners to personally participate, right? And that's something.
The first one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with the communications one. I'm struggling with maybe it should not be taken up in this particular committee. I'm struggling with the way he's laid out lobbying, the relationship between lobbying and education.
Lobbying and.
Lobbying and education.
So I've got this committee.
But let me take another example, going down, require disclosure statements from candidates for statewide office to be posted on the website. Not your committee, Claudia, but I personally think it's a good idea, but what else am I supposed to do? That's what I.
Right, Adam? Yeah. I mean, it's communications. I don't think there's anything else for us to do at this point, except for wait for those.
Well, no, that'd be a big legislative issue.
You see,
You need
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Right. So I guess, I think we talked about communications, kind of discussing, preparing or preparing how to present the legislation. I think we had discussed.
That's true in the open meetings law, because we're living through it on a day-to-day basis. I think that's a little different than saying we're increasing our jurisdiction.
but see, you know what's happening? The assignments have been switched. And I'm getting confused. We were first given a list of questions that each committee was designed to address, period. And now we're getting an assignment that says,
Yeah, but that list, I'm really confused by that list, because it's saying Well, who's supposed to take the lead? Because some of them had like 3 committees that were going to look at.
That's from this perspective, not from the original one.
No, from the original one.
Yeah.
Because so many of the same items were listed on each committee.
Right, and perhaps if I may try to clarify, with that listing, that multi-page listing, wherever an item appeared without any successive reference, so if an item only appeared in the communications section, then only the communications committee, by sort of definition, would be the primary committee, and the item would not get any secondary review. If the item was in the communications committee, and then there was bracketed a reference to the legal committee, then that item would first get considered in the communications committee, and then after communications was ready to dispose of it, send it over to legal for legal committee's review. But the items, each of the identified and particularized recommendations were placed in a primary committee. And so wherever you see them is within its primary committee assigned area. And then a notation might also indicate that after it left its primary committee, where you are reading it, it would go to another committee.
But then what I'm so confused about is if the primary committee says yes, then they're going to turn to the communications committee to say, what's the question that the communications committee answers? How do we do it?
Yes. How do we push it to the public? Is my sort of broad
I kind of think this is
without knowing the particular recommendations that we're talking about. But if we're talking in abstract terms, yes, after substantive review and consideration of a recommendation is made by a primary committee, then a secondary committee would be given that same item for it to chew over and figure out how to make it happen.
But you also want to have some input from the secondary committee that's going to be carrying the primary committee's water on whether it's practical, whether it's consistent with other things that are going on, whether it's a consistent message. So, and all commissioners will be participating in all these decisions ultimately in any event.
I don't disagree with you. It's just becoming very fuzzy for me and unclear. When we got questions posed, you might want to use education committee as a way of understanding this document, because if we're getting comments from the public with regard to changes in the training programs, I would expect, what we did was we looked at it to see if there was a reasonable thing to do. And what would be some of the barriers we would have to overcome in order to respond favorably to the request. And in some instances, we said, well, this would need legislative amendment. And then we were struggling with the issue right now. So two of the questions that we were assigned, we're recommending that we now take that to, I guess, the legal committee to see whether or not it could be, it's feasible and makes sense for legislative, to be among those items that's going to be presented to the legislation for legislative amendments. The way this is written, it's just the opposite of that. And that is what, so I think that this discussion is better made first. If this is the track you want us to take, then we need to have this discussion at the commission level to make sure we're all on the same line with regard to your designation, Keith, of primary and secondary responsibilities. Because we've taken all of our questions that we've been posed already. We looked at the pros and cons. We've considered staff recommendations, and we made recommendations to move forward or to dispense of it as required, as as agreed upon by the committee to present to the full committee for distribution to whatever committee it needs to go, to whatever level it needs to go to next. And it's different from this, but I think it's only different because we're not clear on the primary and secondary responsibility. If I follow this lead, we should not have done any of that, but waited for example, for the lobbying committee to approach the committee. So as opposed to when you look at it from that perspective, you're saying, okay, the education committee says the education committee, those are the staff persons who's executing the program. As opposed to asking them, would it make sense? The lobbying is going to take a lead to say, can we politically do that? And to me, it is just the opposite. Let's look at it from a program perspective. Does it make sense? Yes or no? What are the implications up and down? Once we've thrashed all of that out, then we say, okay, what do we have to do to make it happen? It needs a legislative review. Okay, let's refer that to the legislative people and see if that makes sense.
So why is that different from what, I'm not sure I understand.
Because in this case, the lobbying committee takes the lead. And they're looking at it just from a legislative amendment perspective.
Okay. But I guess when I looked at that list, in fact, I mentioned it to Michael, that we have several committees looking at the same issue, right? And so how do we consolidate? How do we get everybody together? And he said he was going to speak to Keith to get some clarification, right? So it seems that they've now, and what I believe I'm seeing is that they've determined that there should be one committee that takes the lead on it, and then communicate with the secondary committee as to any suggestions they have, and or how it would be implemented with respect to raise this with the communications committee. So you probably did more than you had to in the initial phases because you were very prompt in getting your committee together.
But looking at the communications committee, there's 5 or 6 items listed here. Post candidate disclosures online on commission website. I think that's a great idea. What else am I supposed to do other than knowing that Sandy's going to say, well, that's going to obviously have an expense and you're going to need legislation to do it in any event. What else is there to do?
What if we see these for the secondary committee as an FYI? Just know this is happening because it could potentially have some overlap. And at the point that it has real or practical implications for the committee engages, it could be that it won't.
I just don't see.
For example, let me try lobbying. The one where we maybe would seek, let's say anyone where we would seek legislation or whether or not we need a legal ruling. Before the education committee went to a lot of effort to develop an approach to that, the legal committee can come back and say, hey, look, we've looked at this, and although we'd like to do it, based on our conversations with the council, executive director, other staff, people out in the public, this is not going to fly. So let's take it off the agenda. You don't have to spend a lot of time coming up with a program to implement it. And we'll move on to the next one.
I think that maybe it's a good idea for all the committee chairs to get together with staff with this list and kind of, figure out if the delegation is correct and who should, be primary and secondary. But yeah, I think it's something for the chairs to do jointly rather than, have us discuss. I'm not the chair. I'm not. So.
Yeah, so everybody except for, I think, 2.
Kaylin and Ava.
Okay.
Yeah, let me, from my perspective, the reason I sorted these as well by secondary committee is because I think there should be some preliminary communication, at least between the chairs, where there's an overlap or where an initiative by the primary committee could impose a burden or an obligation on another unit or committee within the agency, which may be doing something that's arguably in conflict or not completely consistent with it, or may have other plans for deploying its resources and would prefer, to defer that. And at least a discussion could take place. Or, the obvious example is a legislative proposal. As Chair has said, that may not make a lot of sense to push at this time or in light of other developments that are taking place. So you could save some time and turn to something else that perhaps should be a higher priority.
Didn't this relate in part to Nancy's memo yesterday about lobbying committee? Because half of these issues, maybe not quite half, relate to legislation, potential legislation. And so, yeah, I think it's a good idea to have candidate disclosures online. I think that would require legislation. So, Mr. Legislative Committee, now you do the lobbying work, or what else is there to answer? And that's true of a couple of these items for at least communications. I'm not sure what else we're supposed to do.
I think there are two different issues on the table. That's what specifically do we do as secondary committees responding to it? That's one question. But the question for me though is, what's the criteria for making a secondary and a primary committee, and we all should be on the same page? Because we're not right now.
I'll tell you the criteria I applied to the secondary. Keith can talk about the primary. I looked at whether there was a burden or an interest that another committee might have the same issue, not a predominant interest or concern, but at least some impact on that committee. And therefore, the pro-action could go in either direction. The secondary committee could reach out to the primary and say, we have no problem with this, or we think if you're going to pursue it, take into account the following. We're planning to, perhaps propose a legislative initiative that this might be folded into. That might be useful information for the primary committee to know with respect to a particular proposal. Or something, perhaps they consider a different setting and saw some impediments.
Again, I almost think we're probably saying the same thing. The question is, we put the chicken before the egg, because it's, I just don't see focusing on, maybe because I'm not of the legal mind. I don't see looking at the legal implication until we see what makes sense from a program perspective.
And I'm kind of just the opposite.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, because I think you could do a lot of work on the program side only to discover that legally it's just not feasible.
It's not employers. I'm not a lawyer and any of the staff.
That's my,
When we're working with them, we're working with lawyers.
but that's my point. That's why I think that if there are legal implications, it should go to the legal committee before the education committee does a lot of work in developing a program.
I'm just saying that it's not developing the program. It's looking at a program that's already been developed, and we're looking to make changes to legislation to extend or that's all it is. And I'm saying that people on staff, we're surrounded by lawyers and the education committee too.
Well, and I think that's a different thing, taking an existing program and revising it or amending it.
That's what I'm asking for legislative amendments.
Right, but there may be cases where we are attempting something new that implies it, so you don't think any of that.
The way he's laid this out here, I don't see that
Well, I don't agree.
for my committee.
For taking the hat off each of this, if you just say, do we think it's a good idea to have candidates disclose their financials and put it on the website? Yay or nay? Then what's the next question? The next question is, can we get it through the legislature, and how do we do it? That doesn't require a lot of meetings until someone's got to sit down, draft a statute and I think you could go through half of these in a half an hour, with having a committee of the whole in effect, and the principal spokespersons should be the chairman of the respective committees.
Yeah, could the education committee ask each of the primary committees on this list to come back with a set of recommendations about how the committee would proceed on these things? And then that's the discussion we have.
I would say at this point, that they look at the recommendations we put forth. And not, when I say recommendations, it's not recommendations for next steps or how to approach. Just look at it that way. It's not to
For
for
education.
education and say, okay. And we talked just about this a few minutes ago. 2 of them require legislative amendments.
But that's,
2 of them we're recommending it goes, we hold it over till next year, and 2 we disagree with altogether.
one. So that's your committee.
Right.
But there are, 5 other committees that have not done that level of review. So all I'm saying is get the committee chairs to take, as primaries, to take a look at these set of recommendations and opine on what they think should happen.
Well, first of all, we should opine on whether, we agree with what committee should be handling it
The
primarily
first order.
and secondarily.
Should, yeah.
And I think this should then be circulated to, the commission with the idea of let's go through it and see if we agree with the staff recommendations about who should be taking charge. And then prioritize it, right? What we're going to start and
Prioritize what?
the recommendations. Prioritize like the recommendations. What's most important? What's urgent to get done? Or commission.
Prioritize, when you say prioritize the recommendation of the questions we're going to address.
No, what issues are most important in order as to what issues are most important to address urgently and which can be delayed, which require legislation and which don't. And if it requires legislation, like we're thinking, what are those deadlines? Because we need to know right away, right? If we're going to do something, we need to have something like a September, October ready to be going in December. So I think it's a lot of stuff. And I think that's the order it should go. The way it should be.
I don't understand. I think for the timing issue, you put all the commissioners in a room and you say the principal spokespeople here should be the chairs of the respective committees. And what do you think of commissioners personally participating in ethics training? And it's a bit of a debate, and you say yes or no. Okay, now who's going to do the mechanics doing that? Soon will be the training.
Goes back to the staff.
Yeah,
Right.
but then, should we require disclosure of online of the post-candidate disclosures? Clearly, that's legislation. Is that a good idea? I mean, what else are we get? Then someone's going to say, okay, Cardozo, your committee, or Cardozo, you are in charge of getting this done. But I don't know that it's a committee process. I'm just groping.
I just feel we just did this. We did this twice.
I'm sorry,
I hear you. I just don't want to get to the point where we're meeting for the sake of meeting. We do it for the sake of doing. Somehow, unless I've lost my mind, we've had this discussion with regard to the delegation of questions to committees. And when we said, well, some of there's an overlap, the question we said, when we all see what the work we've done, we'll see the overlap, and we discuss it as a group.
I don't want to put words in Michael's mouth, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's taking it to the next step. And that is, all right, we've got these delegated, we've got them assigned to the committee. What does it mean? So what do we do? I mean, are we going to do,
It's assigned to the lobbying committee. Some of the questions that I've been posed, that our committee has proposed, is now delegated to the
I
lobbying.
think if we go through this list, then we can determine whether we can we can straighten out things like that.
Right, because if you started working on it already on committee, doesn't make sense to
And
reinvent the wheel.
Commissioner, on those, you had input from the lobbying group on those
Right,
and the lobbying training. So you have that input.
right. I'm saying we've done all of that,
The
but
formal conversation
yeah, we've done all of
with,
that.
with lobbying.
Right. We've had
The
that.
parties group has, in essence, taken place. But you have the staff input. And it's noted that the committee has made its recommendations.
I'm saying this document has the potential to be a useful tool, but right now it's not useful for me because it's making me more confused than ever.
But look, we just resolved something. The fourth item listed, Blair Horner is saying, proposed candidate disclosures online on commission website. The chairman of the ethics committee and the chairman of the communications committee agree that's a good idea. Now what?
Then you take it to the commission, right, or the board, we implement it, or we figure out how to do it.
We have to have an action plan for staff, and they may come back and say,
So,
it's illegal. You know, I'm just.
No, no, no,
I'm just
listen, no,
being hypothetical. I'm just-
you've got two lawyers here who I think would agree that you need legislation. So I'm boiling this down. So then what is it that we're saying? We think it's a good idea. It's supported by Reinvent Albany or Blair, yeah. And so what do we say? Keith, draft a legislation?
Well, I think before you go to that step, I think you would ask staff, is there any impediment to this?
Yeah, that's.
Are there any other considerations or factors you had suggested, or Commissioner James had suggested that perhaps you limit it to certain levels of officials within that group, for example?
But, no, I guess that's the point is we can have a 5-minute Seymour and I can have a 5-minute discussion. I think that would probably be the bottom line.
Right, yeah. On the other hand, I think we've had some discussions where we decided that we wanted committees to really make recommendations to the full commission so that everybody wasn't having to address it, doing the same thing. So this, I think their effort here is to comply with that. Wasn't really a directive, but it was a suggestion so that the recommendations would come from committees rather than have the whole commission looking at issues. Now, maybe there's some disagreement as to which committee should be primary. Personally, I mean, I don't think we want the whole commission sitting down at a meeting to decide which one is primary. I think I'm willing to rely on staff to a certain degree, but if we have issues with some of them, then I think we should discuss those rather than go over everyone.
And that would be then chairs, the chairs of the committee would be
Yeah, that would
going
make
through this first run and see if you agree or why, or ask questions about it, like why it was there.
Do you think we need to do that in a meeting, or can the chairs annotate and send back to us?
Yeah, I think that's how it should be done, not in a meeting, but just,
What would you
ask
send back? You said that, what issue, that Seymour and I agree we should do this. Now what do we do?
Your plan
We
of.
did an action plan.
Yeah.
We did a plan.
No, I think what we're talking about now, though, is not whether we should do it, it's whether, first, do we agree that that's the right committee?
right,
And then if it is, then the committee will deal with it.
and that could be done by email, you know, just.
But when you say deal with it, the first instance, the staff has got to help document why we want it done, right?
Yes,
But that'd be within the committee structure.
right.
Because there's a staff
I'll send you what we did.
liaison to each of the
So
committees.
you and Seymour have done like the first step. You agree.
We agree, so.
Yeah, you've agreed that your committee should handle this, right? So
So
then,
Seymour said his committee would do most of it, but yes.
right, right. And you've agreed that something should be done. Now you're going to recommend to staff what you think that should be, and then staff comes back and says, all right, this is our plan, or we don't think it's possible until.
And the ones you didn't delegate, are those, you're not sure, or you don't think it's something we should handle?
Which,
Like I-
to a secondary committee?
Not even, there's a few that don't have any, committee listed. Just a few.
That's the last three.
And then there's, right, the ones that don't have seconds. So I'm just curious about those.
Well, let's not make it complicated. If we don't have a secondary listed, let's forget about that.
That's his fault.
Right. So maybe the ones that you didn't, or like, those are not things that we're gonna be doing soon, is that it?
Well, Sassower says, the statute created commission should be voided.
The what?
The one on page 4, Ms. Sassower suggested that the statute creating the commission should be voided. I don't know if you have to spend a lot of time on that.
Or some are already done. The commission should consider setting expeditious timelines for procedures. We do have those in part 941. So timelines are set.
But then I guess what I'm groping for is, are we saying that given this list, the chair of the two committees listed, where there are two committees, are asked to say, do they think it's a good idea? And if so, ask Keith or whoever the right person is to draft a brief action statement? Are there legal questions? And assuming not,
I don't think so, Michael. I think what we're suggesting is that the two chairs will discuss whether in fact the primary committee is the appropriate committee to do it. And if they agree, then the primary committee will discuss the issues and come up with a recommendation. And when the chairs have talked, if they feel that the secondary committee should have some input, then they will bring them in at that point.
And that's fine from the perspective of this committee, because we're not a primary committee.
Well, I think if we can address my 5 questions, and then who might to speak to lobbying or to Sandy or to Keith?
Well, I think you should just touch base with the chair of the lobbying committee, which is Ed, of course. Ed.
That's Ed.
Yeah, and just tell him, have a conversation about.
Ed's on education too.
Right, well, he was.
Okay, I'm thinking.
Yeah, you're thinking, yeah, so, just talk with Ed, and then it's up to, and then make the recommendation to the staff, and then the staff has to come back and.
Well, again, staff has already done all of that. We've done our questions.
Then you're ready to.
Our pros and cons, our recommendations, and our action plan.
And let's go. Let's rock and roll. You can be the prototype. The rest of us, how it's done.
There you go.
Yeah.
If you say that to Ed, he'll probably say, okay.
I think it is would you agree it's a good prototype to go forward with? Am I wrong?
I think absolutely. I expect it'll be presented at the
So
upcoming.
now, that's my next question, because it seems to me that we probably need to take a little back steps, have a conversation with legal, with lobbying.
You can do that by next week.
But then shouldn't we be sending a memo from one of you to all the members, all the chairs at least, which is everybody, I guess, except Dolly and Debbie, that we want by next week, them to have consulted with each other on these various subjects.
I didn't say that explicitly in the email, but if you look at my transmittal, it was directed to committee chairs.
Right. But now.
That level of instruction.
But not with that level. I thought it was presumptuous
Right.
for me to go beyond that.
No, but
To say the expectation is to the committee chairs.
But therefore, I mean, seriously, isn't there a clarification now that's needed to send to all the committee chairs, which is basically everybody, that we had a preliminary discussion, and you two suggest that on each of these columns, the primary committee consult with the secondary committee as to whether they think this should be pursued, and if so, discuss a potential action plan and contacting the staff, something like that.
I don't think that's what we're saying, Mike. I think what we're saying is that the two committee chairs should discuss whether in fact they should be the primary. That's what, yeah. And if they are, whoever's the primary, then that committee
Okay.
will take up the subject.
So then do we have an ethics committee?
Yes.
That's his committee.
And your ethics committee. So that's ethics, and then we have a lot.
That's why I got half of my work done already.
Think of a way to get that, to do that.
You almost did. It's up to you, we're left with them doing the work.
I know.
All right. That's clear.
Is it,
So,
is it clear, Michael?
Well,
So I'm all lobbying.
I have to wait for a call from another committee.
Luckily. Is there anything well, you haven't looked at it entirely, but is there anything you think should be part of the communications, primarily?
Primary? I think you can,
No, what? Can I ask you a
I
question?
mean, communications is everything. And it all happened because we were the first committee to do some work, when Seymour and Claudia and I looked into sand.
I know.
Right? That's right. Yeah, we had to investigate his background. No secret.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm glad we're not on that.
so we'll decide.
We're a lot of the ethics, so you got a lot of.
Without sending out a follow-up clarification.
So is this the end of this part of the discussion? We move on to the last item, or is there something else to talk about?
Thank you, Keith. Where's Keith?
Please, must be doing something else. And Seymour. I said, and Seymour.
Okay, should we move on to the last item then? You have a last one? Okay. So the last item is actually related to the predecessor. Is that I think we had all agreed that we wanted to amend the open meetings law to eliminate what I call the physical requirements of the meeting. Anyone can listen in on a committee meeting, but like they can listen in on a commission meeting, but you shouldn't have to make yourself physically available so you can have a conference call and you don't have to open your living room to someone else. And we said that since the open meetings law expires in sometime in 2024, the legislation will inevitably be subject of debate this year. That therefore, and the open meetings law committee, or whatever that's called, said that they wanted recommendations for changes in the law to be submitted to them by January 1 of this year, so that they could then formulate their report to the legislature. So I think it's pretty clear that we want to create a report. So if everyone agrees with me, want to create a report that really is very concrete as to why this is so impractical and forcing us to have meetings and the like.
Talking about committee meetings, right?
Yeah, I'm talking committee.
Right.
That we've already had, the staff has already drafted 2 proposed amendments that would, either one of which would implement it. We can debate what those are. And then I would add to that, so we need to draft a report, number 1. And then I would add to that personally, that we have to think, how are we going to really lobby this? Obviously need consultation with the staff. But, just to depend on the second floor to help us out, I don't think is enough. And, for example, how many other committees of the various agencies run into the practical problems that we're facing and get statements from each of those groups that they agree with us, for example, maybe other things. But, you know, and we have more time, although before you know it, we won't have time. I think that's what we should be doing.
So you're saying we should, yeah, well, we have the recommendations and we should draft a report is what we're gonna.
Yeah, I think that's the heavy, I didn't mean to predominate the discussion, but I mean.
No.
Because we do have,
I think it should be our committee, author of which should be designated by the chair, should draft, consult with the staff, draft a report, and go through the usual mechanics of getting comments. I'm not sure how much more there is. And don't be afraid to disagree with me, please, but I think that's the summation of what we want to accomplish.
And other comments? Yeah, I would agree. Do we send the report to those people we want to comment on it and have them comment in writing? Do we hold a hearing and have them comment at a public hearing? How would you see that?
I think that's a subject to discuss. Because I think how many agencies are there like ours that have this problem as a practical matter? I mean, I know a lot of people on state agencies and they say, we just ignore the open meetings law. But that's not.
The Ethics Commission can say that.
That's not recommended. I think you could, consulting with staff, identify, the top 10 agencies that are in the open meetings law group, to help identify who would be useful to talk to and see if we can get their input. I'm not sure we need to do more than that today, but I think we should have an agreement that that's the approach we're going to take.
And I agree, and there is some partnering we can do. There's history on the provision. The current POL 103-A emerged, which is narrow, that's the extraordinary circumstances exception, which allows remote.
And the disability
exemption. Where there's some sort of circumstance that warrants it. That was an outgrowth of an attempt to have a system where where a quorum body would not have to be physically present in one location, open to the public. And we can gain from that effort, or be able to identify other agencies that have a similar issue.
So, I mean, if there's an agreement, I'm not sure there's more to talk about today until we start doing these kind of things.
I think the one question from staff perspective is there are other legislative issues the commission will have. Once the legal committee or whichever committee it is settles on a legislative agenda. So it's going to be, it's not to hold up on this effort or hold off on it, but it's a question of prioritizing. Whether it's a package that's going to be presented, a series of discrete or distinct proposals that will be presented in different ways.
So how soon will we know, will we have the staff's legislative priorities?
The staff's legislative priorities were actually articulated at the very beginning of the committee process, when staff was asked generally to state priorities and sort of allocate them among committees. So among those were staff priorities. They evolved, that was before the public hearing. So obviously that's added more texture to that process of teasing them out. So some of the priorities, I think, will also include analysis of those issues from the public hearing.
So are all staff legislative priorities currently with the committee?
They should be. They should be. Again, others may have emerged as a result. And one of the reasons for what Keith has done and what I have done is to make sure that the new issues have a home at any level.
Then I would recommend, I don't know if this, then I would recommend that staff, i.e. you, Keith, decide which ones you want to be considered in this next legislative session, along with the open meetings law. Let's call those and come up with a plan of action for all of our legislative agenda, which I think belongs in primarily in this committee.
Which timeframe?
Communications.
And when would that have to be completed for submission?
Have to be done by November, it sounds like, yeah, particularly for the open meetings law. But we should do it all by November.
Sure. Has the commission in the past, Jacob, in the past, had a legislative agenda?
Yes.
They have? And submitting it at the beginning of the year, or just?
I can't speak to the mechanisms, but every annual report was a legislative agenda, and there were legislative proposals that came out of the 3-year ethics review commission process. And Jacob's on the general process, as I understand it. And there were changes made in 2015 in response to some of those proposals.
So those will be in their annual reports. We see the legislative agendas.
Yes. Yes. If you go back to, not in 2020, I don't believe, 2019, 2017, 2018. In fact, some of the priorities that were assigned originally, staff priorities, stated in connection with the original committee memo. Some of those were taken from the prior proposals. So some of them have a little bit of age on them,
Okay.
but they're still timely.
Okay, so I guess I should get started on sort of outlining this. And I guess there's no need for a meeting next week. I'm just thinking back over our whole day. Emily's going to get a report to us on the revised report on the annual report, but we're not going to do that next week.
Right.
And we're going to get follow up with Keith on getting a list of the subject matters that we want to take a look at in terms of the FOIL issues. And really, there's nothing more to do on the committee issues, I guess, until we hear back. And I should get started working on outlining more specifically what the open meetings law approach should be. And maybe I'll try to reduce all this to a master outline and send it to everybody. Get your.
I started looking at that, yeah. And we're thinking about it and like a draft, yeah.
Is that a fair summary?
That's right.
Sandy, what about the need for minutes of this meeting?
There's going to be a WebEx recording and transcript.
That's all. So I don't need to do anything in terms of minutes.
I don't think so.
And where does the transcript live?
It's a good question.
When we
It-
when we
it's-
upload this, when we upload the meeting to YouTube, which we do for all committee meetings, YouTube automatically prepares a rough transcript. That's the transcript that we're referring to.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, it's not edited, so it's what it is.
But at least we have a record.
But there is a recording, that's correct. So there's a verbatim recording of record in that sense.
Yep.
And meeting takeaways.
So there's no, other than I guess, a summary of these issues at the next meeting. There's nothing more that we have to tell the whole commission. It's just in terms of what have we done the last month. So I have to reluctantly cancel next week's meeting and provide folks.
All the time in your hands.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's a date for you.
Emily, is Emily still on?
Emily's in the room, yeah.
I just,
I am here.
anything you want to ask or add to what I've just said?
Nope.
Okay, well, I guess unless there's any further business,
You seem so sad.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. The motion is granted.
So moved.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.